doesn't help, buddy. Hello, bruvs. We're back with Theodore Sturgeon's Some of Your Blood, a 1961 book, which so far has disappointed me greatly. I mean, it's just a piece of garbage at this point. This is page 26 of the, I believe, Signet edition. We can probably turn the light on now. All the time this hunting was going on, and school days and all, things were getting worse around the house. The mother got more arthritis, and pretty soon she stopped cleaning the house much and couldn't hardly cook even. This made the father mad, and he got worse than ever. Sometimes he was out all night and would go to work drunk. In the morning, and he was a good worker, strong, but sometimes when the foreman would say something, he would argue back, and once he hit him, but not much. So he kept getting laid off. When he got laid off, he would draw his pay, and then he would go on a mad drunk until he spent it all. It was not too bad when he stayed away at those times, but when he came home, it was very bad. George and the mother always tried not to say the one word that would set him off, but any word would do it. Then he would beat up the mother, punching her right in the face, and the blood came, and the mother cried, but she never screamed real loud. She was so ashamed. He used to beat up George, too, but when George was big enough to run away, he would run away as soon as the trouble started. And even before that, as soon as the father came home. He would come back after the father was asleep. Once the father was asleep, there was never any more trouble. And when he woke up, he never seemed to remember anything about it. George never ran to the neighbors because they had no use for any of them, or to the cops because the father hated cops, and George never thought there was anything wrong with that. Who was to tell him different? He just went into the woods and lay up in a tree, or hunted if it was moonlight, or maybe just hung around outside until it got quiet, and then peeked in the window to see if he was asleep. And if he was, he would come in and get in bed, and sometimes he would already be in bed and even asleep when the father came in, and those were the times he would wake up, hearing the mother crying first, don't, not now, the boy, and the father would growl that the boy was asleep. George would keep his eyes tight closed and lie still like in the woods, waiting for the rabbits, and the mother crying, no, no, until she would give a little scream and say, my hands, oh, my hands, because that is what he would do, squeeze her arthritis until she gave in, because he always said there was nothing really wrong with her. She was faking. So she would stop saying no, but go on crying until he went to sleep. That was one thing about it. He always went right to sleep. Well, at least he was a deep sleeper. When George was 13, he was as big as a man. He was as big as his father, and maybe stronger, although he did not seem to know this. His father was a yellow-headed man with a lot of bad teeth, and his skin hung down under his eyeballs, under his eyes, with like little bloody hammocks under the eyeballs, and his pants fit him best if he let his stomach hang out over his belt, so he always wore them real low like that. When George was a little kid, he used to try to wear his pants like that, but he never had the belly for it. When he got bigger, he stopped trying to do anything like the father. Well, when he was 13, something happened that changed everything. The father had been working for quite a spell, and for a while there was plenty to eat, and George helped out as much as he could with the cleaning up and all. Because the father would come home, and when he was sober and the house was all cleaned up, and dinner, cooking, what? And dinner cooking, he maybe wasn't like a kind and loving husband in the movies, but at least he walked in and washed up and ate and sat in the door whittling and went to bed without yelling at anybody or hitting. And once or twice he would look at something George did, like whitewashing the wall or fixing the busted porch rail or a step or something, and he would look at it and at George and he would say, well, okay, in that foreign accent of his, and George would have done anything for him then. And he could still remember the one time he came in and sniffed the kitchen and said, boy, that smells good. And the mother just sat there in her wheelchair and cried. She got the wheelchair from the priest who came visiting, I guess, to see if a wheelchair would make her or George or even the father go to church once in a while, but they never did. The father told them not to and cussed every time he saw the wheelchair for a month, but all the same, he let her keep it. And with things that way, naturally, George and the mother knocked themselves out trying to keep everything nice to make it last as long as they could and make the father glad to come home to a nice place. So, this one night was the day he was supposed to stop off at the store on the way home because they were out of food, pretty much, but for a slab of fatback and some turnip greens. The mother set that aside for some other time, and her and George got everything ready for the father to come home with the food, and they talked it around this way and that, what they'd fix according to what he brought, so they could have it ready real quick. Like if he had a lump of chuck, they'd slice off some and quick pound it with the edge of a plate to make pan fried steaks with onions if he brought onions. Or if he brought collards, they wouldn't boil them, but sear them quick in hot fat. George always felt very close to his mother, but in a funny way, disappointed or something like that. Like what she got sorry for herself and used to cry and tell him how she caught the arthritis from him being born, and she would pat herself on her skinny chest and say how hard she tried to feed him off her own body, but she couldn't. He was too big, and she was too sick, and how she wished she could. It was like she was always feeding him from herself all his whole life. And what she put out, it cost her. It weakened and sickened her, but still she did it and did it for him. And at the same time, it was like he needed something from her. He took what she fed him, but it was never enough and it was never the right thing that he wanted. It is very hard to explain this, but anyway, he always felt her giving and giving out of herself, and he always needed something from her and hung around her to get it. Only what she was giving him all the time was not the thing he wanted. This would get so bad with him sometimes that he would have to go hunting again. That usually made him feel better. But now, this one time when they were waiting for the father to come home and planning all the different things they might be doing to fix something quick and good for him, it began to get later and later, and they talked a little more to cover it up, and then they got quiet and just waited. She was in her wheelchair looking down at her hands. Her hands by now were all brown and twisted like cypress. And George, he sat in the doorway looking down the cow path that ran down to the road where the father would have to come. And when it got dark, the mother said, as bright as she could, I know, just shave up that fat back and we'll fry it up like bacon and have bacon sandwiches and we can boil up a lump of it with the turnip greens. And then I think there's a little beans left too, a whole dinner, and we can have it all ready. So George got right up out of the doorway. It was beginning to get too dark to see anyway, and he lit the kerosene lamp and shook up the stove and went to the table with the knife and the fat back to shave it up. So that is how he come to have the knife at the time. He did not go for it, and he wouldn't never even thought about it, except there it was in his hand. In walked the father, and he was drunk as a hoot owl, and he looked all around the place and said, God damn Dot Pollock, and that was all we needed to know. He had fought with the foreman and got laid off and drew his money and got drunk. And the mother, she just couldn't hold it in. She let out one long wail and threw up her poor crooked hands and said, oh, oh, again, again. And he run right through the room and punched her one in the nose so hard you could hear it break, and the blood squirted out before he could get his hand away. So George, clear across the room, he never could remember afterward actually doing it. He threw the knife. Well, it was so quiet in there for so long you wouldn't believe it. Then the father peeled off his undershirt, which was all he was wearing besides pants. It was a hot day, and he looked down at the cut and the blood coming out of it. And the mother was bleeding through her hands and her eyes bulging out over them, looking at the father. And the father pushed George away and got the dish rag and splashed cold water on his chest and wiped it with the dish towel and got his other undershirt from the peg over the bed and a clean rag and put the rag against the cut and pulled the shirt on over it and went out. Nobody had said word once since he said, God damn Pollock. Well, nothing was ever the same after that. The father still had money when he left, and he drank that all up that same night. The next day, he got George alone and talked to him. He said he got drunk first because he was so mad about the layoff, and after what happened, he got drunk because he was so sorry. It seemed to make a lot of difference to him that George should understand this, but George did not understand it and just shrugged his shoulders. And he did not say he was sorry. He threw the knife or anything else, and the father did not ask him to. As a matter of fact, he never mentioned the knife or anything else. But he never again laid a hand on the mother. He spent most of the time just sitting in the open doorway, looking down the cow path. In a day or two, all the fatback and turnip greens was gone, and the beans and a heel of bread. But still, the father sat in the doorway, and the mother in her wheelchair, with wet cloths to her nose. Nobody wanted to say anything to the father about getting some food in or going to work, so the third day George came back from school, and he was carrying a big sack of groceries. He walked right past the father and came in and put the bag down. The part of the bag where George had been holding it against his chest was marked in big black grease pencil, Mirage, which was the name of a white collar guy in the mine office. George quick tools everything out. George quick took everything out of the bag and shoved the bag in the stove to burn up. Then he put everything out of sight, a roasting chicken and 2 pounds of hamburger, and a loaf of stale for stuffing, and a loaf of fresh, 2 quarts of milk, fresh carrots, a whole pound of butter, a jar of strawberry jam, a pound of coffee, and some bananas. The mother probably was too sick to notice, what with her big shut blue black eyes and her nose 3 times as big. The father came in and looked at the stuff as George put it away out of sight. Where you get that? He wanted to know. George, for once in his life, turned and looked the father straight in the eyes, swiped it off the Acme store delivery wagon, and it was the truth. If the father yelled or hit out or said nothing or flew to the moon, pardon, just then he did not care. Pardon? The father stood for a long time quiet and then made a funny little smile. He said, maybe you amount to schmunkthing, yeah, boy. And you know, that made the boy George feel better than anything in his whole life. And that's crazy. Because if ever he hated anything, it was the father. If ever there was a man he didn't give a damn what he thought, it was the father. But when the father smiled and said that he got all hot in the mirror over the sink, he was all pink, and to save his soul, he couldn't help from smiling too. Well, the father went back to work after a while as a swamper out at the head of the slag pile, where they never could keep a man working for long. Who wants to be in hell until he is dead? But the father could get back there any time, and things went on quiet. Never another drunk, never much talk, and school let out. And the mother sat quieter and quieter. It was like she had quit. She was not going to fight anything anymore. Him or being ashamed, or dirt in the house, or anything. She got thin and light as a dead possum. George could easy carry her out to the outhouse and stand her up in there, where she would slowly close the door, and after a long time he would hear her calling. And he would go back, and she would be standing there, and he would carry her back into her wheelchair. George made a pass at cleaning up when he thought about it. He felt like hunting almost all the time now, but he got stubborn inside and wouldn't just hung around her all the time. After the black eyes went away and the nose was only crooked, not swole up, they sent for the district nurse, and she come and looked at the hands and clucked some. What? They sent for the district nurse, and she come and looked at the hands and clucked some, and said she had ought to go to the hospital over to Mountaindale, but the mother said no. Real sharp, the first thing she said in a long while. The nurse took the arm and rolled up the sleeve and looked at it. It was like 2 peeled willow sticks stuck together. She tried easy to bend the arm and straighten it. It wouldn't go, but a little way each ways, and the mother like gasped and bit on her tongue. So the nurse shrugged again and left some pills for her to take if she was in pain. The mother died about 4 months after she was hit in the nose. The father went to work that day, but George just hung around. And when the wagon came for her, He wanted to ride in it, and when they wouldn't let him, he ran all the way behind it to the funeral home and hung around there until they chased him away. At night, he waited until everyone went away and then got around the back and broke in and said goodbye to her in his own way. He swore they would be together one way or the other, no matter what. In the morning, he was there outside waiting, and he hung around until they finished with her and went out to the graveyard. The father came too. They stood side by side watching the grave get filled in, and like someone said, they looked as if they did not understand it, and they did not. Nobody cried. Afterward, the father went back to the mine, and George was supposed to go back to school. But he went hunting. He did not catch anything. That was the bad part. Let's see how many more pages there. Not too many. We can go on. We're only at the 15-minute mark. Life went on. George was hunting a lot of the time, and the father working on the funny part. And the funny part of it was the father began to straighten out a little, at least as far as the drink went. He worked steady, and they gave him a job at the shaft checking tools. And if he kept on that way, he would wind up down below making real money for a change, but he did not want that. Or anyway, he did not try for it. The crazy thing was that for the first time anyone could remember, he did things around the house. Not much, but the whole time his wife was alive, he never set hand to a broom, unless to hit somebody with it, nor got his hands wet except to wash them. Now, when it didn't make no difference to anybody, he would shove the dirt and beer cans out in the yard every day or so and even scrape off the dishes and rinse them. Once he told George he thought a garden where they could grow some corn and radishes and stuff would be nice, only he had no hoe. So George swiped him one off the sidewalk display in front of Mountain Hardware. And the father took it and cussed, but wagging his head and grinning, he must have knew George swiped it, because where would George get money? But he never asked. He was just pleased, and he actually hoed out a patch, and George went in the Acme and pretended to be studying the seed pictures and swiped 8 packs of seeds, corn and melon and sunflowers and some hot peppers, and the father planted them all. Good little boy, robbing to feed himself. One time at night, George was coming home from the old quarry on the other side of town, where some big frogs were, and right in the middle of town, someone came out of an alley and grabbed his arm, and he almost hit him, but saw it was the father. The father walked along with him and began talking something about we don't have to live like pigs no more. If he didn't have to spend all his money for food, he would have money for maybe a rug for the floor and some more dishes and a tub to wash them in, and another lamp and some paint and things. When they reached the corner, the father turned George around and they started back, the father still mumbling on and on about this, and when they came to the alley, he looked up and back and all around, and then quick pulled George into the alley. They went halfway down, and it was real dark, and the father took George's wrist and pulled his hand down to where it touched one of those slanty cellar doors that comes out of the side of some buildings, and the father pulled up on it, and it came open a ways, and George saw it was not locked. The father lowered it down real quiet and walked off in the dark, leaving George standing there. After a while, George tried it himself, and it opened, and he went down the steps. Down there he could not see anything, but he could smell the flour and dried prunes and all the other stuff that was there. It was the basement of the Acme Market. The next day he got matches. Then, in the night, he went back and got his pockets full of 2 cans of milk and a can opener and some tallow candles, and best of all, a toy flashlight and batteries to fit it. A little tiny thing, but all he needed down there. After that, he went there every night almost and brought stuff home, but he was smart and never took but from open cartons and never left anything around like wrappers or burned matches, and he was always sure to sit quiet under the alley door listening the way he'd do it in the woods. The father never said nothing while he slowly filled the whole place up, all the cupboards and under the sink, with canned goods and pancake mix and rice and lentils and what all. There was not much said between him and the father, but things were better between them than ever before, and sure enough, the father did go ahead and spend some money on a little rug for the middle of the floor and some dishes from the 5 and dime. So then he found the meat market had a Had a side cellar door too, only it was locked. He hung around town a couple days until the delivery truck came, and he helped the man unload cases of bacon and 4 quarters of beef and 4 sides of pork. And by the time he made his third trip up and down the stairs, he saw where he could jam the spring lock open with a bit of cardboard, and he did. That night he went down into the basement and up into the meat market. Had a good look up and down the streets outside, then went and opened the walk-in freezer. When he opened the door, a big bright light went on inside and scared him so much he slid inside and slammed the door to hide it. As soon as it closed, the light went out, and when he turned back to the door, he couldn't find any handle to open it with. If it had been a Saturday, he sure would have been dead. Monday morning, If it had been a Saturday, he sure would have been dead Monday morning. As it was, he was alive but stiff as a popsicle when they opened up the next day. And the silly thing about it was the door opened with a foot pedal beside the door, so the butcher could come out with his hands full. But how was a guy supposed to know that in the pitch dark because he forgot his flashlight? They put him in the lockup and got him thawed out, and a couple days later, Judge Manarora sent him up for 2 years, breaking and entering and attempted burglary. The father was there looking like at the funeral as if he did not understand what was going on, and there was some whispering and pointing and nodding heads between the judge and the priest who gave the mother the wheelchair and the district nurse who showed up too. The father just sat there. He probably didn't catch one word in 10. George didn't say anything either because after he was thawed out, he somehow just didn't care what happened. So the 2 years wasn't such a tough rap after all because it was in an orphanage kind of place instead of a pen. Nobody ever did find out about the stuff from the Acme market. And we shall stop there at page 36. How long's the next one? Decently long. Kind of really long. Jesus. That can't be right. So it goes from nothing to 28 pages. That's what it says. That must be him in jail. All right. That's all for this rendering of some of the old blood. Maybe he turns into a vampire in prison. So far, he's just a fucking thieving hillbilly. All right, Bob, that's all.